Golden State Media Concepts bring you Book Review Podcast, a haven for bookworms of all ages and the widest genres, from mystery to memoirs, romance to comedy, fantasy to sci-fi. If you love to read, this is a podcast for you. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Book Review Podcast.
Hello and welcome to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Sarah, and I hope your week is going well so far. We are already up to Thursday, which for those of you who work a regular Monday through Friday work week means the weekend is coming up. And I hope that if you have a weekend, or even if you don't work a regular schedule, you've got some time coming up where you can sit down with a good book and get lost and just enjoy reading. That is what I always try to do on any time. Well, whether it's the weekend or not, any day I try to find time to read, as I'm sure I've mentioned more than once on this podcast. So as I said on Tuesday's episode, we have another author interview today, a returning author. This time, you may recall author RJ Rosatte from a few months ago. I think it was back in April when he was on the podcast for the first time, talking about his debut novel, which was part of the Tawny Mountain Mysteries. And if you remember the Tawny Mountain Mysteries, they were a set of novella-length novels that all took place at the Tawny Mountain Resort in New Jersey, a fictional location, but several different authors, 7 or 8, I think 8, all wrote mysteries that took place at the Tawny Mountain Resort. And Dark Side of the Mountain was RJ's contribution to that, introduced his characters Katie and Malone, or Katie and Casey. Casey's last name is Malone, so the series is called Katie and Malone. He then wrote 2 follow-up novels and is in the process of writing more Katie and Malone stories. So he's back today to talk about those 2 follow-up novels, which were published shortly after Dark Side of the Mountain. Let me go ahead and give you the description of the first in the series. So it's the first in the Katie and Malone series. It's actually the second Katie and Malone story, if you count the contribution to the Tawny Mountain Mysteries. So that one was called Dark Side of the Mountain. This second or first, however you want to count it, book is called Revenge Comes Calling, and the description is as follows. Katie Douglas and Casey Malone first met at the Tawny Mountain Resort. She an inspecting engineer, he a relaxing mystery novelist. Together they discovered a kidnapping plot on the mountain. As they tried to unravel the mystery, they uncovered a plot to bomb the high society wedding of the Wittenauer family being held at the resort. An imprisoned mafia don vowed revenge on Robert Wittenauer, the former DA that sent him to prison for life, and had set in motion the plot to murder the entire family and guests at the wedding. After thwarting both of these plots in an explosive climax to the story, Katie and Casey went their separate ways, promising to get together again. Now, Katie is on her way to spend what she hopes will be a romantic weekend at Casey's mountaintop retreat in Virginia. Before their evening even begins, the long reach of the mob interrupts their solitude, promising that no good deed will go unpunished. Vowing to get even for the couple's interference at the Tawny Mountain Resort, the perpetrators of both plots take aim at Casey and Katie. As they dodge mafia hitmen with the aid of a mysterious caller, Katie and Casey fight for their lives when revenge comes calling. So that's actually a little bit more of a description than you often get in stories, but it makes sense when you know that the first was part of the compilation of the Tawny Mountain Mysteries, and this one technically sort of starts the Katie and Malone series. But if you were to pick this one up, you would think there is a lot of backstory here that I am not getting. And so if you read the description, you know that there's a lot of backstory that you would maybe want to go back and read Dark Side of the Mountain to get. One thing that I really like about these books, they are published by Short on Time novels, I think. And they are all novella length. So you can read all 3. Dark Side of the Mountain, Revenge Comes Calling, and Isle of Deceit, the three Katie and Malone stories that are out in just a few hours. The three of them together would equal probably about a full-length novel. Or you can just take them and have a quick, enjoyable weekend read. RJ packs so much action into Revenge Comes Calling. It is just amazing. The things that Casey and Katie experience and go through, their romantic weekend turns into a much, much different weekend experience than they were expecting. But I enjoy RJ's writing. I enjoy that he packs in so much action into this story, and that we are starting to get to know Katie and Casey more as characters. We're getting to know a little bit more of their backstory, getting to know them a little bit as a couple as they explore whether they're going to actually be a couple. They definitely developed a friendship and an attraction in the first book, and now they're kind of exploring that to see where it might lead. So that is the first, Revenge Comes Calling. And let's go ahead now and turn to that interview with RJ so he can talk a little bit more about Revenge Comes Calling, Isle of Deceit, and Katie and Malone as characters that he's written. Hi, RJ. Welcome back to the podcast.
Thank you very much for having me. I certainly enjoyed talking to you last time, Sarah, and I look forward to this one.
Yeah, me too. I really enjoyed talking to you last time. So we are actually here to talk about two new books in the Katie and Malone series. Before we do that, if you could just give people who maybe didn't hear that first interview, or if they did hear it, a refresher about who you are.
Okay. Well, I'm a writer that lives and works here in southern Ontario, a little village called Bayside, on the shores of the Bay of Quinte, which is part of Lake Ontario. I've lived most of my life here, and then I've been writing on and off my entire life. I wrote 3 books before getting involved with the series with Short on Time Books we spoke about last time, where my book, Dark Side of the Mountain, was part of the Tawny Mountain Mystery Series. And once I got that book out of the way and seems to be going good, I spoke with Karen Bryson, the publisher, and asked her if she'd consider allowing me to continue on with the same characters and perhaps develop some more stories. And she said, yeah, that'd be a good idea. And that led to the first of the Katie and Malone series, Revenge Comes Calling.
Yeah, so it's the first of the Katie and Malone series, but it's kind of the second. At least it's the second that involves Katie and Malone. So it's just not part of the Tawny Mountain Mysteries. Can you talk a little bit about Revenge Comes Calling?
Alrighty, well, at the end of my first book, Dark Side of the Mountain, sort of left Katie and Malone saying goodbye to each other, and I myself wondered, well, what happens next? So I put the thinking cap on, and I said, well, you can tell from the last page there when they parted that there was a spark between them, so I said, well, perhaps we should have them get together again and see how things go. And Katie Douglas and Casey Malone are two just everyday people. They're professionals in their own right, and they get together again in this book. But the bad people, bad guys from the first book, come after them because they're a little upset that they broke up their plots that were in the first book. There's first the mafia type, and then there was the financier that was trying to do a kidnap scheme. And they hire a bunch of nefarious types to go after them, and it's more or less a story of Katie and Malone trying to keep out of their way and stay alive while these boys keep bouncing off each other.
Yes, and there is a lot of action in this book. Katie and Malone go through a lot. Did you have a specific inspiration for the story, or did you just want to pick up where the Tawny Mountain Mystery portion of the story left off?
Well, that was part of it, but the story kind of grew. You know, I'd be writing along, and I'd think, here's something else that's going to happen right about here, and then here's another character that might prove interesting. And there's one character there which was just supposed to be a short little put in there, the one assassin named Cold Carl Steele. And got done with him when he attempted to knock them off and got thwarted by the U.S. Army Rangers. Later in the story, I said, well, whatever happened to Carl? And so I just kept that thread going in the background. And about the time I thought maybe I was done with him, getting towards the end, they said, well, how are we going to wrap all this up? But I said, well, Carl's still out there somewhere. So brought him back into the final episode, you might say. And coming back to Honey Mountain Resort sort of made the whole thing come full circle and made the story complete.
Yeah. I liked that they ended up back at Tawny Mountain Resort. Although I realize that it's fiction, but I worry about Tawny Mountain Resort. There's a lot of bad stuff that keeps happening there.
Oh, yeah, and it's not done. I don't know if you've read any of the other series, if any of the other authors were interested in being on your podcast, but I read each one of theirs, and everybody treats the characters a little bit differently. But, yeah, there's a lot of bad things seem to happen around that spot.
Yeah, exactly. I'm going to interrupt now so we can take our first break of the podcast. When we come back, we'll be talking more about Katie and Casey as characters, and then we'll also be talking about the second book in the Katie and Malone series called Isle of Deceit. So stay tuned. You're listening to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, and I'll be right back.
Do you want to be healthier, yet you just don't know what to do? All these shows telling you this and that, but nothing seems to work. Well, listen close. Golden State Media Concepts has got something great for you. The Health and Wellness Podcast dedicated to workout trends, healthy eating habits, diet, and everything about healthy living. Join us in our banters as we help you not just live life to the fullest, but live it to the healthiest.
Welcome back to the GSMC Book Review Podcast. I am speaking today with RJ Rosatte about the first two books in his Katie and Malone series. We've been talking about the first one, which is called Revenge Comes Calling. And we're going to talk about a couple other things, and then we'll move on to talking about Isle of Deceit. Since that is in this section, I do want to go ahead and give you the description of that book. And that is as follows. Katie Douglas and Casey Malone, having survived revenge attacks from the mafia and a scheming financier, are rewarded for thwarting plots aimed at guests of the famed Tawny Mountain Resort. Billionaire owner Raymond Elliott has sent them on an all-expense-paid, month-long vacation to his private island retreat in the Bahamas. But the couple, who are just beginning to enjoy their budding romance, find it hard to relax in the tropical paradise when bodies keep washing up on the shore. Even more perplexing, the islanders won't talk about the strange goings-on that Casey and Katie encounter. When they discover that the supervisor of the work crew assigned to build a private airstrip on the island has secret activities that he is willing to do anything to hide, they find themselves targets once more. They seek to solve the mysterious deaths and get to the bottom of who Jake Peters really is and why this place, this beautiful piece of heaven, has become an Isle of Deceit. So that is the description of the second in this series, or third, depending on how you're counting. And I mean, I've said before that I really like Katie and Casey as characters, and I realize they're fiction, but I still feel bad for them because, or maybe I shouldn't feel bad for them, maybe I should blame them, because wherever they go, things happen. Here, I don't think they're even on the island for 24 hours before the first body washes up, and I realize it's novella length, so, things have to happen quickly, but bodies start washing up there in the midst of all this kind of craziness. They're just trying to have a romantic getaway, but that is not in the cards for Katie and Malone. So let's go ahead and get back to the interview with Randy, and he's going to talk more about Katie and Malone and more about Isle of Deceit. A little bit about Casey and Katie, or Katie and Malone as the series is. What about them do you think will resonate with readers?
Well, primarily that they're just everyday people. Like, they aren't superheroes, they don't have superpowers or anything, and they don't... they're not capable of any magical feats, but they just seem to go through life and just know the right things to do at the right time. And by keeping a moral point of view, they manage to work their way through.
Mm-hmm. And they don't have superpowers, but Katie is pretty kick butt when it comes down to it.
She certainly is. And like the one thing, all of the stories I've ever written, I don't have pushover people in them. Like, I don't like the fainting damsel, and I don't like the anti-hero male as far as that goes. I like normal people, you put them in extraordinary circumstances, and see how they respond to it.
Mm-hmm.
And as you said, she's a butt girl. Yeah, she is. She was brought up by an Army dad on his own, and taught her how to take care of herself, and she does that very well.
Yes, she does.
And he may not be quite as physical as that. He's got a good head on his shoulders, and he knows how to be her foil in a perfect way.
Mm-hmm. And so, did you do any kind of research for this story?
Well, I certainly had to, because I always like to get the locales realistic. And I used to be a long-haul trucker, as I mentioned before there, and I used to live in Kentucky up in the eastern part of the hills. And I was familiar with the general area, and the area around Fort Chiswell was one of my favorites, a beautiful spot with rolling hills. And the best research thing I had was Google Earth. With Google Earth, you separate down and you go on Street View, and you can actually see what this building looks like, what that street looks like, what this reservoir looks like. And so you can put some real life details without actually having to go anywhere.
Yeah, it's amazing what you can find on Google Earth.
Mm-hmm.
So talk now about Isle of Deceit. And I know that they're moving forward in the series, so we don't really want to give too much away. But can you talk a little bit about the second book in the series, Isle of Deceit?
Yep, it's a standalone story as far as that goes. It helps to have read the first couple of books to know who Katie and Malone are and what their background is. At the end of Revenge Comes Calling, the owner of the resort sends them for a 1-month all-expense-paid trip to his Paradise Island in the Bahamas. And they land on this Paradise Island, just a beautiful spot where he's got a resort built and all staffed and everything you'd ever want to spend an idyllic 30 days just laying in the sand. But, of course, that's not the way it's going to go.
No.
Washing up, and they discover some bad things taking place on this island. So not just Tawny Mountain with bad stuff; it could happen in the Bahamas too.
Maybe it's Katie and Malone. Maybe they shouldn't be going places.
Even at magnets, who knows?
Yeah. There's some pirate lore in the story, which I thought was a lot of fun. Are you a fan of pirate stories, or did it just kind of work for the story for the plot?
No. A bit of both. Like, I grew up in the 60s, and Treasure Island was one of my favorite books, and Long John Silver was a TV series at the time, and it was a fascinating thing to watch, and all kids just love pirate stories. And you can look at movies today, and you see pirates themes all over the place. And the Bahamas was pretty much the center of the Buccaneers back in those days. And there's a lot of treasure ships that are still unfound out there, and so I figured, well, that's an interesting angle to get in there too. And it helped sort of with a second plot line that came full circle together with the other stuff going on the island, and it ended up actually tying the knot at the very end of it.
Yeah, and I know that you and your wife travel a lot. Is this a location that you've been in the Bahamas?
Well, we've been to the Bahamas, to Nassau. And we met some very interesting characters there, because we just don't hang around resorts. We get out and hire a car and go see what the back streets are like. And we met some very interesting people there. And that gave us a lot of background, too, for what the people are like, what they sound like, how they behave. And a lot of our travels help a lot in this stuff. Mm-hmm.
And so what's next? Are you working on another Katie and Malone story? Are you working on something else? What are you working on?
I can't leave Katie and Malone alone just yet, unfortunately.
Good to know. I like them.
Well, I thoroughly enjoy writing them, and one day maybe the thrill will wear off, but right now I have 3 more stories I'm working on. The one that I'm currently writing is called Murder on the Mountaineer. I don't know if you and your readers or listeners are familiar with the Rocky Mountaineer, which is an excursion train that goes through the Canadian Rockies. And it's a beautiful train. It's a wonderful experience. It's double-deckers with glass roofs. And I thought it would be real cool to get them up there for a convention for the Mystery Writers Association of North America at Chateau Lake Louise in the heart of the Canadian Rockies. And perhaps they'd want to go on an excursion on this train when they discover that they have murder mystery theater on a day trip. And I tossed the idea at Karen, and she said, well, you may run into a bit of a problem with the people that own the Rocky Mountaineer. You may want to pass it by them. And so I had to do some research as to who owned it, and I said to myself, maybe this is going to be a little too, for a novella, it's going to require a lot of paperwork and a lot of permissions. So Karen suggested, well, why don't you create your own mystery train? And so I did. It's a local excursion train, and it's an interesting story so far that I've got written about how they get aboard this train and the things that happen leading up to it. And when the Murder Mystery Theater starts, we discover there's real murders going on.
Of course. Yeah, that sounds fun.
Mm-hmm. And the next one after that is called Return to Tawny Mountain. And I haven't really developed much in that because of where we're going this fall, which is going to be the third book. It involves some more travels.
Mm-hmm. And you had mentioned, I think, if I'm remembering correctly, when I talked to you last time, that you and your wife were planning a trip to Iceland. Is that this fall, or am I remembering that wrong?
That's exactly correct. In my reading this summer, I decided to do some background research in Iceland. We've researched the island like you wouldn't believe it. I'd swear I'd lived there all my life with all the stuff we've read and seen. And I discovered the Icelandic sagas, which are stories that were written in anywhere from the 8th century up to the 12th century. A lot of it was passed word to mouth before it was finally written down in the 12th century, and it makes some really fascinating reading. I'm about one-third of the way through this 1,000-page book.
Oh, wow.
And it doesn't have all the sagas in it, just the most famous ones. And it gives you a lot of fascinating background about how the Norsemen and the Vikings went from Norway and discovered and settled in Iceland, and on to Greenland and North America, and then backwards and decided maybe Iceland was far enough. And so the last book of this series that I have planned is called To the Land of Fire and Ice. And it's going to involve a mystery that occurs when an old schoolmate of Katie's, who's from Iceland, and she's been in regular touch with her, and the young lady suddenly goes quiet. She hasn't heard from her, can't get a hold of her, and they're afraid something has happened. And so they journey to Iceland to see what happened, and they get involved in some really neat mysteries there.
Nice. I love all the research that you do and how you put the places that you've been into the books. Because, you can tell that you really love to travel and you love to research the places that you travel. I think that shows through in your writing.
Yeah. I always love to go places with my eyes wide open.
Yeah. Yeah. How have Casey and Katie evolved since the first book through these next two?
How they've evolved, well, they've certainly become closer in their friendship and relationship. I keep tossing the idea of, are they going to get married somewhere along here or just what? And I'm not 100% sure. My beta reader, who is my sister, keeps kicking me down the road saying, do something with them. And, they're taking it slow and easy with each other as far as that goes. And we'll just see where it all ends up. But they've evolved by becoming closer and perhaps more understanding of each other. And on these next few books, I think you'll see much more of that.
Jumping in here so we can take our second and final break of the podcast. When we come back, the conclusion to my interview with RJ Rosatte about his Katie and Malone series. Stay tuned. You're listening to the GSMC Book Review Podcast.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Welcome back to the GSMC Book Review Podcast. We're going to go ahead and get right back to that interview, the conclusion of my interview with RJ Rosatte, author of the Katie and Malone series. Now that you have 3 books that have been published, has your writing process changed at all, or is it pretty much the same?
No, pretty much the same as far as that goes. Everything else is just rolling along here pretty good. We've had a real good run with the Tawny Mountain Mystery Series, and once this book that I'm working on now is finished, they're going to start a promotion on the Katie and Malone series, keeping Dark Side of the Mountain as book 1 of the Katie series. Because without that, it sort of starts in the middle of the story without really seeing the background.
Right. Oh, that's wonderful. Congratulations. So what are you reading this summer, or is it all the Icelandic sagas? Because that sounds like a huge book. Are you reading anything else?
Well, I started reading Jordan Peterson, 12 Rules for Life, which is pretty much almost sounds like a psychology textbook, which I was interested in because I took psychology in university. That was a very interesting, controversial book. But after that, I got into the Icelandic sagas, and it's, like I said, it's a very big book, and the preface to it was probably a couple hundred pages long alone, just with all the scholarly lectures about the sagas and how they came to be.
Wow.
And I said earlier, it's been such a busy summer with grandchildren and children. My daughter and her family came up from Indianapolis for a bit, and it's just been a really busy summer. Our business is busy, too, so I haven't had that much time to do much reading or writing.
Yeah, it sounds like it. Are you reading the Icelandic sagas on Kindle or on an ebook or an actual huge, gigantic tome?
On Kindle.
Okay.
You can download and carry it on my phone. We've got the grandkids out at the beach, which we've got some beautiful beaches here on Lake Ontario. And I just sit in the shade and I just flip through the pages and keep on reading.
Okay. I was picturing you taking the book on the plane with you in the fall and just like lugging this gigantic book with you. So where can people find you on social media, on the internet? Do you have a web page?
Well, on Facebook, I have my author's page at RJ Rosatte. That's Rosatte, author. And my personal page is just Randy Rosatte. And people are welcome to look there, too. It's wide open. I have no secrets. And I don't care who looks at my pictures or sees my silly videos. On Twitter, you can catch me at Paxus King. That's at PAXUSKING. And if anybody wanted to email me, they'll get me at rjrosatte@aol.com.
All right. Well, thank you so much for that. What else have we not talked about that you would like for people to know about your books or writing in general?
Well, the one thing, I guess, the wisest thing I've ever heard is that it's never too late to do what you always wanted to do. I always wanted to be a writer from way back in high school, like a serious author, writing books that actually get published. And it's taken a long time. I had 3 previous books that I self-published after spending $1 million in postage, the old-fashioned way of sending out manuscripts and getting them back. And it was such a rush to finally get introduced to Karen there at Short on Time Books, and I can't say enough good things about her and her company. And they certainly got me launched in this series, first Tawny Mountain Mysteries and now my own series. And I'm looking forward to the twilight years, you might say, just continuing writing. I got a lot of years to catch up on.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful. And just a quick aside on Short on Time Books. So the premise on the books that they publish is that they're more novella length, correct?
Yeah, they're cozy mysteries is what they like to call them. They're almost all novellas. There's a huge following out there in the world that has to take a train to work, whether it's New York City, Los Angeles, Toronto, Vancouver, or where. And there's nothing better than to have something that you can finish off in a couple days' ride, a quick story, something that's easy to read, but you still get into it. And that's primarily what they're about, and I find that my story has been picked up an awful lot that way.
Mm-hmm. And do you find that how does that work for you in terms of writing? Because you really, especially in Revenge Comes Calling, you really condense a lot of action into just a couple hours of reading. Do you like that approach, or do you find that do you ever find that difficult?
I find it quite so what I'm looking for here. I guess I really enjoy this style of writing where the story doesn't have to go on for 400 pages. That 40, 50,000 words, you can still have a fast, action-packed story and carried on enough that it keeps a person entertained for a day or two in reading. And it's quick and easy to write as far as that goes, and the editing process is a whole lot quicker. And you can still do, like, for instance, my 3 stories I've got out there so far, if you put them back to back, you'd have a nice 350-page novel. And they could do that, you never know.
Yes, absolutely. Well, RJ, I want to thank you so much for taking time to talk to me today. I always love talking to you. You're very interesting, and I love Katie and Malone and can't wait to find out more about their adventures.
Well, thanks so much for having me on your podcast. I always enjoy talking to you out there in the West Coast. I hope the smoke clears up for you.
Oh, us too. It's been not great. So, enjoy Iceland. I can't wait to hear about your adventures.
Oh, I'm thoroughly looking forward to the trip. I'm looking forward to writing the book, and I'll certainly make sure you hear all about it.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you once again to RJ Rosatte for making a second appearance on the podcast. I really do always enjoy talking to him. He just seems like a lot of fun. It seems like he approaches life with a great attitude, and he is fun to talk to, so I appreciate that. And I appreciate that he writes books that are fast-paced and action-packed and still have time to explore relationship and solve mysteries. So if you are interested in novella-length novels, especially, and mysteries, then you should definitely check out the Katie and Malone series. You should, even if you want to, start with the Tawny Mountain Mysteries. You can read, they're all different authors, but you can read and, see how they all interpret the Tawny Mountain Resort in their stories. Definitely read Dark Side of the Mountain if you want the backstory for Katie and Malone's crazy revenge, trying to evade revenge scenarios. Yes, I can speak really. In Revenge Comes Calling, you'll definitely want that backstory. So if you are interested, then you should definitely check out the Katie and Malone series. Thank you, as always, for joining me. I want to remind you that we do have 2 giveaways currently going on. We have Kelly Garrett's book, Hollywood Ending, that you can, that the giveaway is going through this Saturday, so August 25th. And then the giveaway for J.D. Sanderson's book, A Footstep Echo, is going through next Saturday, September 1st. Winners will be announced on the following Mondays, so August 27th and September 3rd. And can I just take a quick side note to say, I was laughing a little bit this week because my authors for this week were RJ and JD. I mean, it's the week of initials, but that has nothing to do with the giveaways. I just had to throw that in there. The giveaways, all you have to do is go on social media, Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram, and comment on those episodes. You'll see all kinds of reminders. Comment on this post for a chance to win. So you should have no trouble finding it. Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter, those links are in the show description or on our website. You can click the icons and go to our social media pages. So make sure you sign up for those giveaways if you're interested in reading either Hollywood Homicide, Hollywood Ending, did it again, if you're interested in reading either Hollywood Ending or A Footstep Echo. Thank you so much for joining me. Please join me again next week. I think I'm going to talk a little bit more science fiction. So join me on Tuesday for that. In the meantime, have a wonderful weekend and go out there and get yourself lost in a good book. Thanks.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Book Review Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.